Okay, now let's take a little time to talk about debt. I know, groan. This can be one of the most stressful areas, but we're going to talk it through and talk about what you can do in this area and how to think about it. So, you can think of debt generally as two main areas. So, you have your consumer debt, that's usually a shorter term debt. In other words, thinking primarily of credit cards, but it may also be car loans, right? So, these are usually debt that we incur for consumable things that tend to lose value pretty quickly, right? Like if you put going out to dinner on a credit card, you'd eat that dinner would be gone almost immediately. Cars lose value fairly quickly. A lot of things that we tend to put on credit cards are often not holding their value versus um, taking out debt for something that has a corresponding asset. So, for example, if you buy a house, you may take out a loan to buy that house, but then that house is there, hopefully holding value. So, there's a corresponding asset to that debt. So, um, student loans, right? We tend to find very frustrating, and do keep in mind that they may not be typically considered negatively like consumer debt, right? They reflect the earning potential that you have in the future. So I know student loans are a source of stress. I get that, and we'll get that. I get there in a moment. But first, let's talk a little bit more about that consumer debt side of the picture. So first, you do want to limit in the first place, ideally, and then reduce and eliminate that consumer debt as much as you can. And as you're able to do that, it can get out of control. It can feel unavoidable to put things on a credit card. And sometimes it can seem like the only realistic option to put things on a credit card. So, don't beat yourself up over wherever you are with consumer debt, but it is something you do want to keep an eye on and move forward as best as you can, right? Budgeting can help with that, right? Finding space in your budget to make sure that you can pay off what you put on a credit card, or if you have credit card debt that's built up, that you can start paying it off. And then, of course, being sure to protect your credit history by paying things on time. So, to be clear, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't use credit. It's more how you use it, right? Building a credit history can be an important part of how our current financial system works, right? It's just a matter of using credit wisely. For example, just putting things on a credit card without maxing out the balance and then paying it off right away on time, consistently over time, can go a long way to building that credit history. Now, speaking of credit history, the other thing you should know is you can get ahead on your credit, right? So if you have credit card debt and that consumer debt that's building up, especially if it's not being paid on time, especially if it's very high in proportion to the available balance, can really hurt your credit card history. But your credit history is something that you can get ahead on. So, for example, if you see a big transaction, like maybe buying a house in your future, you can look at your credit now. So many people, for example, might go to someone in the mortgage industry when they're ready to buy a house, and then they find out that their credit is not in the shape they want it to be in to make that transaction. But you can actually go in advance and see what's happening. You can say, at this point, a little while out, I'm looking to do XYZ. How does my credit history look? What is it? What is my score? What is it that I need to do to get ready, right? And that person, right, can help you understand what's going on in your personal picture and how you can improve it, right? So you can go in advance to see what's happening and figure out how to improve your credit to meet the goals that you see coming in the future. Right. And what affects your credit score is weirdly not as logical as you would think and can change over time. How it is considered and viewed can change over time, quite frustratingly from a consumer perspective. So it helps to have some help, right? And this is not something that someone in the mortgage industry would typically charge for, right? You might be a future customer, and so often that's a conversation you can have in advance. So just know that's a potential resource available to you. Okay, now back to those student loans. Um, First, let's just pause to recognize the frustration and often unfairness that is having student loans, right? I've been there. I think that's worth recognizing. But when you do have student loans, there are a few things to consider. And then you can think about finding more help if you need it or digging in more detail on your own. The first thing is just not to hide from it. And I know that's really tempting to do sometimes. Do know what you have going on. It can seem like just a big, scary, sort of arbitrary number, especially when you're still in school, that doesn't impact your day to day. So it's a little bit too easy to disregard and run from, just a little bit human nature. But know how much you have and know what that's going to mean practically speaking in terms of your monthly payment amounts, what they start and when they start. A lot of people don't understand what those payments are going to be when they start. And then think they would have made different decisions had they known that in advance. So do consider what your monthly payments will be as soon as you can. Have that information and consider that in your financial picture and the decisions you make. So next, you want to look into consolidation options, right? Consolidation as in sometimes student loans are taken out in all different pieces and all different loans over time. And a consolidation means that you take all of those loans and put them together so that you have one payment, one place to make that payment, right? And there are different consolidation programs and options for federal loans in particular and otherwise. So you want to look at that, and if that is something to make sense for you, that makes sense for you. Sometimes there's a benefit to doing that. And do keep in mind there may be resources for you, sometimes specifically in your state. For example, some states have student loan authorities or other nonprofit organizations that can provide resources for you, both education on student loans, but it may be particular programs, whether educational or financial, that help you figure out your loans and what consolidation options might make sense for you, what repayment options might make sense, how to think about your debt. And then you want to think about the interest rate as well, right? So once you start paying back, high interest rate student loans can really dial up the total cost that you end up paying back. You might end up paying back much more than you originally borrowed, particularly on those high interest loans. So you may want to tackle those loans first if you're repaying extra. On the other hand, some people look at low interest loans and think, I could do something else with the extra money that I may have coming in instead of allocating it to student loans. Maybe it doesn't make good financial sense to pay that back as aggressively, right? Some people look at it that way. And other people don't care as much about the rates in that way and just want to pay off as aggressively as possible because they want to have the satisfaction of no debt. And there are different theories as to how you can pay back debt. Some people tackle the highest interest rates first for the reasons I just mentioned. Some people like to tackle the smallest loans first, so you can see the loans disappearing and have that momentum, right? So see, again, there's, like we talked about in the beginning, there's the so-called logical financial answer, and then there's the answer that works best for you and aligns with your goals, right? You need to put both of those together to find an answer that works for you. It's true for finances across the board. It's still true for student loans. Another thing you want to keep in mind is to understand your repayment plan options for your loan, right? Understand what your options are and how they affect how long and how much you will pay back. You also want to think about whether or not you may qualify for loan forgiveness at some point in time. So for example, if you work for a government or a nonprofit entity, there may be loan forgiveness options and you want to get the details right. Not just later when the loan forgiveness would apply, but from the beginning, right? Understand how that works. There's some programs that in place that allow for that. More programs recently, depending upon whether you're listening, that allow people to fix some of the errors they may have made in the past as they're trying to pursue those programs. To look at that, understand how it works, right? If you're qualified for forgiveness, you're probably talking about a lot of money. So it's really worth understanding and getting it right, even though it can be a bit of a complicated area. So overall, really what you want to do here with student loans is be informed and do not hide. It's intimidating and can feel crushing sometimes, I know, but you can and should figure out your picture and what works for you. And you can get help. For example, there are student loan lawyers out there that for a surprisingly small fee, right? Sometimes we tend to think it might not be realistic to hire another lawyer or a financial professional. Student loan lawyers, often for us, a small fixed fee, will look at your student loan picture, and particularly on the federal side, but some take a broader look, and walk you through what your options are so you feel like you're taking advantage of all the options available to you, and that you're doing the so-called right thing, or financially smart thing within what's available to you with your student loans. And just having that outside look from someone who's an expert in this area can be worth what is usually relatively a small investment. And as always, there's going to be a resource section at the end of this, so make sure that you take a look there for other resources as well.